Hi, this is Gracie with Beautiful Life Self-Care, and I see you have a few callers on the line today, and I'm really excited to have the call today. The title of the call is Bust Through Stress, How to Stop Worrying and Finally Enjoy Your Life. And I titled this talk of exactly what I needed to hear in a talk even just a few years ago in my life, even though I've been teaching yoga for about 5 years and practicing yoga for probably about 10 years now in my life. Up until a couple of years ago, I lived most of my life pretty intently in the stress response. Hold on, I'm just gonna mute the lines here. Hold on a second. Great. Okay, awesome. So just so we don't get any background noise. But, it's been in the past couple of years that I really started to understand that the stress response, it was a choice that I was making in my life and something that was not really adding to the overall quality of life that I was living. And so the talk I want to give today is about really starting to understand what the stress response does to us and look at the consequences of that. And I'll talk a lot about what's going on in my own life right now because I think it feels very important to this process. And then after that, I'm going to share what I think are the best ways to start to bust through that process. And I like the word bust through because it conveys that it's shatterable, the stress response that we have, and that there's something that's on the other side of it but I think we get the hint of it. I used to get the hint of it a lot when I would meet a woman who just seemed really relaxed. And I would look at her and I would look at the way that she went about her day, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's the kind of woman who lingers over her coffee in the morning, maybe even has time to read the newspaper. She's the kind of woman who says no to other people and goes to bed early. And I didn't understand how to get to that place. I saw that was a place that I wanted to get to, but I also saw where I was standing. And it took me a long time to really figure out how to get from point A to point B. And my whole goal of starting Beautiful Life Self-Care is because I don't want it to take so long for other people to have to learn what I had to learn. And I think that there are some ways once you've already walked the path that you can simplify it for other people. So I'm here today just out of service to really share what's helped me to simplify and how I've gotten myself in a place where I really do enjoy a much deeper relationship with my life and feel like I can really rest in the calm of it and get deeper satisfaction out of my interactions. So I think of all the words I say today, that's the intention that I want to share. So I'm assuming that you're here today because you want to enjoy your life more and maybe feel more fulfilled or maybe empowered. That was a word that I was really thinking about, that I didn't feel empowered before when I was living in more of a stress response. But I felt like life just started to happen to me, and it would happen as soon as I woke up in the morning. I would start to get feelings of anxiety and like I didn't have enough time to get through what I needed to get through in the day. And this was really before I even stepped a foot out of bed in the morning, as I already felt like I'd failed at my day. And what I really wanted at that time was this feeling of no, I have license over my day to day. So it was that feeling of being empowered. And I'm going to talk today also about extreme self-care and how this has really helped me to get through this past year and particularly this past part of my life. Just to keep, I know some of you are on my mailing list, so you probably know this, but my father had been sick for about a year, and he actually passed away a week ago, last Friday night. And obviously I'm very sad. There are lots of emotions that have come up. But what I'm really struck by in this process is how much that my self-care has really helped me to not to avoid the pain of what's going on right now, but rather to really help me to feel what's going on right now in a much deeper way. And when I feel it, know that I have the stability in my life to get through it, and also to really be there for the people around me. And it's shown me that the self-care that I do, even though I think it can feel selfish for a lot of us sometimes, it definitely felt selfish to me that I'm going to take this time when everyone else around me is having a hard time, when my father is sick, to still, do my yoga practice, to take care of myself, to eat the foods that make me feel good. But what I find in that is that when we can find that magic formula of self-care, that helps us to break through that stressful response, that it really helps us to be of service to the people around us. And in the self-care, this extreme self-care, what I've also learned in this last week and the last couple of years of my life is that what self-care is not, and what I see that self-care is not is it's definitely not like the brownie, and it's not the glass of wine or two. And it's not the workaholism where I just feel like if I could just get all of my work done, then I can relax. That I've really started to understand that is what's working against me in these moments. And even though in the moment it couldn't seem a lot like self-care, and I think that that the stuff that makes us feel good later on and the stuff that makes us feel bad later on, in the moment, both of them can kind of be like sitting on one shoulder and telling us that it's going to make us feel better. And so what I hope that we can get out of this talk too is to understand the distinction of like the practices that we do in our life that are actually self-care, and the practices that we do in our life that are more like imposters, that maybe feel exciting or satisfying in the moment, but afterwards that they leave us feeling more depleted. So for me in this moment right now, extreme self-care is also, it's about having the courage to really tell my story and my family's story. And the word courage, actually, it's a Latin word. The start of it is cur, and it's the Latin word for heart. And so what courage really used to mean when people would talk about it was to speak one's mind by telling all of one's heart. And I love that because I feel like there's so much that's been going on and so many emotions that I don't think that I can go into a process like this without speaking from my heart and really sharing what it is to be in my heart. And I think that to me feels like the hardest part of the stress response is that it brings us up into our heads, and it brings us into a place where we're not able to be present because we're so worried about what's going to happen, or that what's happening is not enough, or that something in the past that we just can't quite let go of, it just gnaws at us. But the saddest part, I think the biggest drawback of that is that we miss the opportunity to really be present in our hearts and to feel like loving energy and to feel a sense of connection to the world around us and a sense of love for ourselves. And this, even though this past week has been extraordinarily hard, like one thing that I have to say is that I do feel really grounded in my heart, that I'm really in touch with what's important right now. And so I think that by telling my story here, that hopefully it'll help you also to get grounded in your heart as well. So I just take a moment and do that. There are a few more of us on the call right now. I'm really happy to see everyone out there. And just close your eyes, wherever you are. If you're listening to this recording later, that's fine too. And take a tall spine and a few deep breaths. Draw your inhalation down into your belly. Let your exhalation fully release. Whatever's happened before this moment, we can realize that that's already happened. Whatever will happen after this moment, we can realize that even whether or not we worry about it, it's just going to happen. And then we'll find ourselves just here in the spirit of being centered in this heart space. And that can be whatever feels best. You can think about it like love, or you can think about it just being present, or whatever helps you to feel good about being in the moment. All right, thank you for that little moment there. Okay, so in the yoga world, we talk a lot about, being present, and we talk a lot about love and peace and calm, and, I think a lot of yoga teachers, especially out there, kind of present themselves like they're always in these states of peace and calm and love. And as a yoga teacher, a seasoned yoga teacher, I have to say that for myself, it's just not true. That we're totally human beings as well. But the practice of yoga, that is the path to get ourselves there. So it's important to talk about love. It's important to have a goal in this, about being in our hearts. But I think it's also really important to talk about the stuff that gets in the way of that, and the reasons why we start to detract from that good enjoyment of the moment and get into that stressful response. And I'm going to call what that is for myself perfectionism. And it's just, from talking to a lot of women, I think that a lot of us are in this together too, that we really feel that perfectionism is kind of like where we're stuck. And I love Brené Brown, her definition of perfectionism. And for those who don't know Brené Brown, she's this amazing social worker and social researcher who's done a lot of research on shame and perfectionism, and also the flip side of that of she's really discovered that in her research that there's a subset of people that she calls them really wholehearted people. And what they all have in common is that they're pretty easy on themselves, and that they really recognize perfectionism as a pattern, and they let it go, and they realize that how much that hurts them, and that the good enough is good enough for them. So from her research, she put together a definition of perfectionism. So I'm going to read this now. It's out of her book called The Gift of Imperfection, which is a great book, one I actually use in my courses. So her definition is, perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels this primary thought. If I look perfect, live perfectly, and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. Perfectionism is self-destructive simply because there's no such thing as perfect. Perfection is an unattainable goal. Additionally, perfectionism is much more about perception. We want to be perceived as perfect. Again, this is unattainable. There's no way to control perception, regardless of how much time and energy we spend trying. Perfectionism is addictive because when we invariably do experience shame, judgment, and blame, we often believe it's because we weren't perfect enough. So rather than questioning the faulty logic of perfectionism, we become even more entrenched in our quest to live, look, and do everything just right. Feeling shame, judged, and blamed, and the fear of these feelings are realities of the human experience. Perfectionism actually increases the odds that we'll experience these painful emotions and often leads to self-blame. It's my fault. I'm feeling this way because I'm not good enough. So, yeah, I think that definition, for me, when I read it, I can relate to so much in there. And I love this sentence. I'm going to read it again. So rather than questioning the faulty logic of perfectionism, we become even more entrenched in our quest to live, look, and do everything just right. And this, to me, this feels like the hamster wheel of the stress response. That we set out, and this maybe even before we get out of bed in the morning, that we're anxious, we're starting to worry that we don't have enough time to get everything done that we need to do, that what we've done hasn't been good enough. And right away that we're already starting to get ourselves entrenched and to feeling more of the stress response. And so the one choice could be in the morning that we look at it and say, oh, that's perfectionism at work, and I'm just going to do the best I can today, which is going to set your whole nervous system on a much easier course. But because that's probably not our pattern, it's not the way that our brains have been programmed, we're going to keep making it worse and worse throughout the day. So I think another way to say this is that when we're trying to use perfectionism, we're really trying to use our willpower to craft our lives. And it's something that in habit change research right now is really big in people understanding of like why diets don't work and like why New Year's resolutions don't work. And it's because we're trying to like strong arm our life into being exactly the way that we want it to be. And I wish I had like a hand raising function on the call right now, because I would really love to see how many people are feeling that this is also that they can relate to this idea that if I could just like get it into place a little bit more, then we could finally relax. And it's something that I feel all the time. Just think, okay, like even when I'm tired, like one more little bit of work, and then I can relax, and then I can be in this nice, easy response to life. And what people are finding in habit change research right now is that the antidote to this like willpower base trying to make a change, why willpower doesn't really work here is it's because it's exhaustible. That it takes a lot of strength to kind of get life to conform to how we want it to be, as if we really could do that, to be honest. But when we think that we can try, we're using all of our resources, our valuable energy, we're using it to try to get life to be perfect. And as a result, like when we get depleted, then we're going to go to like the opposite response, which is totally, waking up on a Saturday morning and not being able to get out of our pajamas until like, 1 o'clock and eating cereal out of the box or whatever you go to in those moments where you're feeling like the what the F effect here. So the habit change research that really has been found to work is it's like making just these teeny tiny little easy changes, of like just being like, okay, this is where I'm at right now, and I'm gonna do the best I can, and I'm gonna see if I can just do a little bit better in the right direction. So it's lying in bed and instead of stressing out, just giving yourself a little bit of positive self-talk. So I'll talk more about that later on as I talk about some of the concrete ways that we can bust through stress. But in the spirit of courage, I'd like to tell a little bit more about my story. So I grew up in a family that did not really teach me a whole lot of self-care. Both of my parents, just on the outside, they were really presentable, intelligent, funny, capable people. And my dad was actually like a champion on Jeopardy. Mom is just she's like an awesome bridge player and really smart, really always looked great. And on the surface, it was the idea that if you could just kind of get everybody to see you as doing really well, then you were doing really well. And it's stuff, if you look at their parents, like it was passed on through the family lineage. But the problem is that behind all of that both of them really struggled a lot. My mom was an alcoholic and didn't get sober until I was about 7 or 8 years old. My dad had a lot of depression issues that he never really was able to treat, and a lot of self-esteem issues that came along with that. And so I saw them that the way that they would take care of themselves. With my mom, it was like, a few glasses of wine at night. With my dad, he definitely used food to take care of himself. So I saw that like overeating became the way to nourish yourself. And I just, because we learned the patterns of our family here, I just grew up thinking that this was normal. And it started at that age, but it really expressed on really until these last few years when I started to get more consciousness around what I was doing. But my idea was that if I could just look at grades, if I could get great grades, that became so important to me all through school, straight A's all the time, and have a good social life, where I was not missing out on anything, then everything would be okay. But the problem was that, my parents got divorced when I was 5, which is a young age to be experiencing this at. My mom was still drinking. My dad was depressed and like really pulled away from me at this time. And I had a really traumatic experience when I was around 5 years old. And it's funny because I remember things before that year, and I definitely remember things after that year. But during that year itself, like I just didn't really, I didn't remember. I think I kind of blocked it out. But it was during this time that I definitely started using food and eating to nurture myself. And I remember just coming home from school. when I was young, and just, having these days where I didn't feel like I was like sitting into school, and I'd come home and I would like eat this junk food. And I knew I wasn't supposed to be eating it because I had started to gain weight during this time. And so I always felt like I had to like hide it from the world around me. And my brother, of course, was this like little skinny kid that couldn't gain weight. So my mom would buy the food for him so he would eat. So I right away I started feeling like there was like these instincts within me that I felt like I had to hide, which again started the stress pattern that I wasn't being perfect and that something was wrong with me. And so I needed to use food to like help me with this. And this made me gain more weight, which anyone who's grown up being overweight, it's a hard way to grow up going through school. And I don't regret it now because it's completely deepened me in the way that I needed to be deepened in my life. But definitely at that time I would have chosen not to have that. So instead of dealing with this stuff, and again, I didn't have the tools to do it at the time, what I did was I internalized all of it. And I thought, again, if I could my grades became this huge fixation for me. And I remember it was the last day of my junior year of high school, and we got our report cards on our last day of school. And I think I had like all A's and like a B plus, and then I got a B instead of a B plus. I think I was expecting to get a B plus, but I got a B. And all of my friends were like going out, and I got my grades, and I was so upset that I had to go home. And I remember like beautiful summer day on like the last day of school, and I was like in my house like crying, upset over my grades. So when I talk to my clients about the cost of their habits and the cost of their current patterns of life, I always ask them to really think about what the cost is. So by maintaining this way of life, what is it taking out of your life? And so when I look back at that, I'm like, oh my gosh, the cost of that was that, I wasn't present. I wasn't able to enjoy. I was 16 years old and crying over my grades, which makes me laugh now. But at the time it was, felt really serious to me. And it cost me my self-esteem at that time, that I thought my self-esteem was tied to like how much I could get done and what kind of college that I got into. And worse than that, it was just I was so locked in myself that like I think it cost me connection to the people around me at that time. I had good friends, but I felt like it was really hard for me to let those friends in. I felt alone in my struggles. And a huge part I love about doing this work now is that I see that it's very impersonal, actually, the things that we struggle with, that like we all struggle with feeling stressed out, especially people who are ready to make a change, that we've reached the end of our line. And I hear the same things all the time. When I ask my clients, like, what do you really want to be experiencing? The thing that comes out the most is people want to experience a lighter way of life. And it's because we're so used to kind of carrying around all of these weights of feeling like we're so responsible. We have to get so much done. We have to prove so much about ourselves here. So when I look back at this period of time in my life, it makes a lot of sense, actually, in this impersonal way. And I'm going to actually wait a little bit later on the call to tell you a bit more about that now. But I think that when I reflect a little bit more about my parents and how it was passed on to me, I see that one of like the main issues that they had here was like really taking the time to start to think about themselves and to really start to see their patterns. And one thing for both of my parents is that it was really hard for them to like invest in themselves. And like I just remember like my dad, he would like wear these like belts and things that were like always falling apart, and it was hard for me to understand that like in order to make a change that I really had to like take the time and energy to start to think about this stuff. And I think that another cost of this here is that we were all kind of really defensive around each other. And when I was about 12, my dad and I just really started fighting a lot with each other. I think this is something that like dads and teenage daughters start to go through of like, I don't understand you anymore. But I think that we were, at that point, we really cut each other off pretty emotionally because we were so defensive of not knowing how to really relate to each other and invest in each other and ask each other these deeper questions. And I look at that as just being like a huge cost of this time. And it's something in this past week that I've had to look at a lot of one, just understanding why this stuff happened the way that it did. And also, making peace with it, but looking at it as saying that these are patterns, and these are patterns in myself that I still feel them, but I'm so much more just committed and dedicated to dealing with them now, because I see that what I really want, what's on the other side, is like healing and connection and being able to just like call this pattern what it is and move away from it. And it's perfectionism. It's something. It's not just with my father, but it's really harmed other relationships that I've had. We had a boyfriend for the past 3 years. We broke up about a year ago, and it was a good relationship in a lot of ways. But when I look back at it, especially from my perspective of what's happened in these couple of weeks, and really looking at like defensive patterns, like I see that like I wasn't really taking care of myself in a deeper way, and I was taking a lot of that out on him. And one of the things that I would get so frustrated with him about is that he loved sweets and loved eating lots of sweets. And to a point that seemed fine to me, but when he would go back for like that second serving of dessert, I would start to get really critical of him. And seeing that now, I like just in this past week of dealing with stress, like oh my gosh, like my desire for like a second serving of desserts is so high that because I'm in this like stress response again, I see that like all of my old patterns of like the eating to take care of myself, that like kind of voice on my shoulder that tells me that this is going to make me feel better, that's still alive and well, and probably the reason that I would get so stressed out when my ex would start to do this as well. And so for me, it actually makes me feel better to take ownership over this, because it means I don't have to take it out on the people around me. And I think that perfectionism, it's also really helped, it's affected my work. But I think that if we're so set on wanting to feel perfect all the time, then we're not going to be able to take feedback from the people around us. I've a yoga teacher, and she says this thing that if you think you have the perfect triangle pose, that your triangle pose, it's never going to get any better at all. But it's only when we're vulnerable, we're able to go into a work situation and believe in ourselves enough to ask for feedback and to accept feedback, that we're going to be able to be the best that we can possibly be in our careers as well. Also, I think that one of the biggest things that I think perfectionism has really caused me to cost me in my life is that it's actually just the enjoyment of it. And it kept me from like playing when I needed to play. And the best example I can think about this is that I lead yoga retreats in Costa Rica, and I've done like 5 of them over the past 4 years. So these like really incredible weeks. And the first one that I did, I led it with a good friend of mine, beautiful yoga teacher. I've known her since I was younger. And we got there. It was a gorgeous place. And I set out to teach my first class, and I got so insecure. And I realized it was because I felt like I had to be perfect at it, that all these people had showed up to take yoga with me, and I had to be great at it. And when I get insecure, I've really noticed that my pattern is that I start to feel jealous of people around me, especially women who are taking really good care of themselves. And this was before I really understood self-care in a much deeper way. And so this jealous response was something that would come out really often. So it cost me, when I think about it, like a full week in Costa Rica of having a great time in paradise, that instead I was locked into my head feeling insecure and jealous. And again, I love it that I can laugh about this right now, because I definitely did not feel like I needed to laugh at it at the time. So I think one more note of why we can get locked into this perfectionistic mentality is that our culture, it really promotes perfectionism. And one of the best ways, I think, to see this is to watch Mad Men. I don't know how many of you out there have watched it, but it's a show about after World War II, these like ad executives in New York who created modern advertising, or started to create this idea that you could sell the idea of having a perfect life if you would only buy, you know. And the great part of the show is that it shows you how miserable these people are who are creating these advertising campaigns. Just like huge problems with alcohol and infidelity and trauma from the war that aren't being dealt with, and how that all of that gets funneled into creating this like commercial capitalistic society that is about selling this idea that we can just stay young and we can somehow get it all together, and if you're not getting it all together, then something's wrong with you. So I found yoga really for myself when I was in college. It was the end of college. And the thing that was so beautiful about going to those classes was that it gave me my first taste of real self-care. And I love this because I think yoga is so counterculture in this way, because yoga tells you that you get to ignore everything else around you, all other expectations, and that the self-care happens from just being present with yourself. It shows us that we can have much deeper experiences, and that it's okay to feel and to experience. So when I found yoga, I definitely felt like, okay, this is the way that I can start to take care of myself, and I felt like I was really moving in the right direction. After I did the Peace Corps after college and used yoga throughout the 2 years to make myself feel better in a stressful situation, even though I definitely experienced a lot of like stress and anxiety over those 2 years. And when I came back from the Peace Corps, I had a pretty challenging year of really readjusting back to life in the United States, and especially working in like an office setting. Something I've learned about myself is that like I can do a lot of things, but to like sit in an office, it's harder for me to do it. So it was bringing up a lot of anxiety for me. And the thing that got me through that time was that I started to go to yoga classes after work was over. And I would spend the whole day just feeling uncomfortable, anxious, trapped. And then I would get into the yoga studio and all of a sudden just like feel into my body, let the anxiety be there, realize that there were these other parts of me that can sense the anxiety that are bigger than that. And that was when I decided that I like needed to learn more about this practice and took the step to becoming a teacher. So as I said before, I've been teaching yoga for about 5 years, and it's been great. You know, I've loved having a yoga practice, but I have to say that from that experience, I say that yoga is just not really enough, especially if you're going to yoga like 1 or 2 times a week. And I did that for years. You know, go to yoga class a couple times a week, work on getting these poses right, you know, try to battle like the perfectionist tendencies that would come out in the class, be aware of that. But the problem was that I would go to a yoga class, I would teach a yoga class, and then I would come home and I would drink a couple glasses of wine, and I would stay up late, and I would sleep late, and I would wake up and drink a cup of coffee right away, start to feel anxious, and just spend the whole day feeling like time was just on me, and I wasn't being good enough. And I think the yoga, like I can't even imagine how my life would have been if I hadn't had the 1 or 2 yoga classes a week. But I just felt like I still wasn't quite where I wanted to be. And I think that thought of like being heavy is really like appropriate. But I just felt heavy. I felt like my relationship, I said before, it was just heavy. I felt like there was a lot of sort of like weird anger that would come out sometimes. It wasn't my self-esteem of myself. I didn't feel like I was really tapping into my full purpose. I felt groggy and not as energetic as I wanted to be. And more than that, I felt out of integrity. That like I knew I could be doing more, especially in my role as being a yoga instructor, and yet I couldn't quite get there. And I was upset with myself, but because I kind of had this like perfectionist pattern in my family, like I didn't really know how to ask for help. And I didn't really know how to invest in myself either. It felt like I just had to kind of keep going how things were going and just accept how things were. And so as life would happen, I ended up learning more about Ayurveda and just getting like this spark of inspiration. And what Ayurveda is, for those who don't know, is it's the sister science to yoga. And it's actually older than most of like the traditional physical yoga postures. Some of the oldest texts ever, they're Ayurvedic texts, like 5,000 years old. And in Ayurveda, it's the science of life. And it's about yoga as part of Ayurveda. You use it as a therapy, but it's also about sleep. It's about meditation. It's about diet. It's about the whole thing of just living your life in a state of balance. And you do that by really learning about yourself on a much deeper level. So you learn about yourself, your unique constitution, what makes you thrive in the world, which is different than every other person around you. And when I started to hear about this, I was like, okay, this actually seems like something that could help me, because I'd done enough diets at that point that I knew that, like, one, I thought my willpower was broken. That was like a thought that, like, I just wasn't strong enough to do these dieting things. But at that point, I started to see, like, okay, well, maybe the diets that are out there, they're just not really right for me. And maybe I need to start to figure out what really does work for me. So I started to learn about Ayurveda, and it was such a big shift for me that, like, within a couple of months, my relationship that I was in started to end. I really after I was so afraid of leaving this relationship that I'd been in. I lived with this partner. We had a dog together. We've been together 3.5 years, and it gave me the strength that I could start to see that, like, I could really take care of myself. That this was giving me the skills to take care of myself. And we ended up breaking up, and I saw that by practicing this daily rhythm of self-care that I was learning, that I wasn't falling apart. And actually, I felt like I started to evolve. And during this time, actually, over the past year, I've lost like 25 pounds. So physically, I've become much lighter, and that feels great. It's helped my yoga practice so much. It just makes me feel so much lighter in my body. But more important than that, it's lifted this layer of subtle to intense anxiety that I realized that I've been carrying around with me since I was young. So it's felt amazing to break through it, and it's something that I want to teach everyone else about too. And there's so much to learn about in Ayurveda that I teach these courses on it, which are very helpful for understanding yourself. But even in these 10-week courses, there's only so much you can learn too. But the great thing about Ayurveda is that a little goes a long way. And people go in India, they study Ayurveda for 6 years. Like, they become a doctor and study it. It's very, very intricate. But what I think is one of the most important concepts to talk about in Ayurveda is it's the concept of vata. And in Ayurveda, we learn that there are 3 main energies that pretty much make up everything. They're called doshas. And the doshas, they're the building blocks of constitution. And that every person is going to have a different setup of building blocks between these 3 doshas. And they are, just briefly, and you can always look this up later if you want to learn more, but they're kapha, which is energy of earth and water, pitta, which is energy of fire and water, and vata, which is energy of air and ether. And the one that's considered the most important in Ayurveda is vata. And the reason for that is because it's air. If you think about it, wind blowing, it moves things. And vata is the one that moves the other doshas around. So when we start to feel really out of balance, it's usually because our vata is out of balance. And vata, when it goes out of balance, it leads towards a feeling of anxiety. It's that high, getting stuck up in your head energy. And if kapha, we carry that much more in our hips and our thighs. It's the feeling of being grounded in the world. And people who have too much kapha, they're going to be not be able to get up off the couch and feel dull in their minds. But people who have a lot of vata, it's the energy is all moving up, because that's where the light, airy energy is. And it moves into our brains, and we get stuck in our brains, and we start to feel this wind of stress and anxiety moving through here. Vata imbalances, if you look at traditional Ayurvedic texts, it said that 80% of all illnesses are caused by vata imbalances. So it's really important to look at vata imbalance, let's say that. And vata imbalances, they're really anything to do with the nervous system. It's like not being able to sleep well at night, feeling these anxious, racing thoughts. It's the feeling of being constipated, the vata when we get anxious, stressed out, we start to dry up in our body too because the energy is so light. And this is why usually when we travel, we can get constipated, or so when we travel, we can start to get anxious. And if we look at it, we're moving around, we're up in airplanes, we're getting dehydrated, we're moving our routine around, and it's going to be natural that we start to get this constricted feeling. So what's considered to be the best therapy to treat vata imbalances is creating a daily routine for yourself that really works. And in Ayurveda, the word for this is, or in Sanskrit, it's dinacharya, and it means daily rhythm. And daily rhythm it's about, waking up at the same time every day, more or less. It's about eating your meals around the same time every day. It's about going to bed at the same time, really giving ourselves the right amount of sleep. It's about exercising at the same time every day. So it's, first of all, it's extremely not sexy. It's even hard to imagine buying a book on this of do your daily routine. It's kind of basic stuff. And when I tell people about this, I'm like, is this so basic? Are we all already doing this? And I realized that no, we're probably not already doing this. Mostly because we live in a culture where we're taught that being a night owl and being productive at night is a good thing, and we're taught that to fuel yourself on caffeine and, to get yourself through the day on caffeine is totally acceptable. And we're taught that when you're at your desk and you're too busy to eat a grounding lunch, that it's okay to skip that lunch or to eat it distractedly while you try to get the rest of your work done. Especially as women who had mothers who took care of everyone else before themselves, it's just so ingrained in us too that we're not supposed to be putting these needs first as well. So when I talk about this stuff, I'm like, it's simple, but I think it's subversive in its own way. And the women that I work with to create this daily routine for themselves, they see it. They see how powerful it is, because when you start to apply this, it's very powerful right away. And then we also, the biggest struggle is about just fitting this into your daily life. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end of the call about how to start to fit this daily routine into your life, even when everyone else around you is not doing it. And just one more note on this is that people, all the time they want to talk about, what's the Ayurvedic advice for me? Tell me what I need to do. And really there are a lot of Ayurvedic doctors out there that will not even see you to treat your imbalances until you have dinacharya going in your life. That until your vata is under control, so you have boundaries around your life by having a solid daily routine, then they won't, but nothing else is going to work, basically. So they're not going to waste their time treating you until you do this preventative health care, set yourself up, and then they'll start to see you and give you the advice of the herbs you need to take or the specific therapies that you need to do within all of that. So, again, vata energy, if we're going to get one thing out of this talk, is just to start to notice when you feel vata energy, notice when you get stuck in your head. And to me, vata imbalance and perfectionist tendencies feel so similar. It's that feeling of being constricted and cut off. And the way to treat both of those is to really start to open ourselves up and rest in something that gives us a greater sense of stability. And I like to actually think about the metaphor of when a baby is upset or anxious and crying, the way that we make the baby feel better is by swaddling the baby, by giving it boundaries and holding it close. And I think of that as being my daily routine, is that by having these boundaries around my day of no, this is just when I turn off my computer at night, and this is when I go to bed. And this is what I do the first 5 things in the morning. I do the same 5 things every single day in the morning when I wake up. And it gives me this feeling of just being safe, that I don't have to lie in bed feeling anxious, but right away I get to get up and I get to start to take ownership and feel this empowered sense that I was talking about, of feeling empowered in my day in that way. So, daily routine, really important here. Okay, so that's the promise that I'm going to give you all here, that if you start to pay attention to your daily routine and your vata energy, that that I think it's going to help you to start to really trust yourself and to start to feel a deeper sense of what's possible. And I experienced this really when I broke up with my partner. I was so nervous that as I had bad breakups before, and I felt that anxiety when I would get up in the morning. It was really unsettling, ungrounding for me. And it was around this time that I had invested in some deeper Ayurvedic knowledge. And actually, when I invested in it, I really thought I was just getting knowledge, but just like my yoga knowledge, I could pass on to other people. And I wasn't really expecting my teacher to be like, well, if you're going to do this, you have to start to live it. So I was like, okay, I guess, I can start to make some changes. So I went into it, and I found that, I totally did not fall apart during this breakup, as I said. And I think it's because, especially this morning routine, it's a workshop I teach a lot, create a dynamic morning routine for yourself. And it's, I think one of the most important things that you can do is to start to use that first hour or even half hour of the day in a way that feels dynamic to get ownership over your day. So I promised you 3 steps, and I think if you just listen this far and get that, then I think that you have all the information that you really need to start to bust through stress and give yourself a life of self-care. But let's look at these 3 steps as just being like bonuses to it. So the first of these 3 steps is don't add a side of stress to your stress. So when you start to feel stressed out, don't get stressed out about being stressed out. And this is like vata imbalance to the max. And when somebody's truly vata imbalanced, I think that hamster wheel is the best possible way to describe it, that we're in our heads. And the word that I hear used a lot is that you just churn. And anything that's stressing you out, you start to get more stressed out about it. You start to think, oh, I'm just, I'm in my perfectionistic response. And this is when we start to feel this. This is the sign that we need to live from our hearts, that stress is a healthy part of life, and it's just a reality that in yoga we can talk a lot about trying to get past our egos. But the truth is that if we have to have an ego to be in the world, to get our jobs done, to move through the day, we need to make sure that we know who we are. But if we're only in that ego and that stress response, then we lose sight that we have these other much bigger aspects of our being. And it's just something that, again, in this past week, that of losing somebody very close to me in my life and really having to look at all of that what comes to me is there's just not time, that life is so short, and that what's truly important when we can kind of get out of the hamster wheel, we know what's important, that we want to enjoy our lives, we want to feel a sense of purpose, we want to feel deep connection, and that the way that we can do this is by starting to practice consciousness around our thinking. So I think that especially when you start to notice patterns in your life, that you're I'm always stressed out at this time of day, or this boss always stresses me out, to really ask yourself, is it worth it? What is this costing you right now? And not out of a spirit of being mean to yourself about feeling stressed, but just starting to see it as this impersonal pattern that we all go through this. We're taught this, and we don't need to make ourselves feel bad about it. And it's the idea we talk about a lot in yoga that the tighter you hold to something, or the more you're trying to muscle your way into getting out of something, that the more entangled you're going to get into it. So it's the idea that you're pulling on a knot, and you're pulling tighter and tighter and tighter, and you're not going to be able to unwind the knot. And so the work actually, it becomes in just letting go, dropping into the heart space, practicing compassion with yourself, and realizing that by doing that, by breaking the cycle of stress, that actually you don't even have to do anything. You just have to take a step back and drop the conflicts here. So first rule here is just don't add any more stress to your stress. And live from your heart and really embrace the idea of being good enough. I read something this morning, a little affirmation is, what if we could treat each new challenge as an adventure? That instead of waking up in the morning and thinking oh my God, how am I going to get everything I want to get done today? You can think, all right, what's going to flow through me today, and what's possible, and how can I just do the best that I can in it, and can this be an adventure? And I think once you start to practice that and take that step back, I think that you'll see that you have a lot more choice than you think in this. And especially when you start to see it's not a personal flaw, it's not a personality flaw in you, but it's just the response. So my second thing that you can do, or my second step for busting through stress, is to begin to meditate. And I think maybe some of us, we have this vision of, if you're not a meditator, of it's like yogi on a mountaintop, fingers joined together, chanting the sound of Om. And that's just really not the way that I meditate. I'm like a reluctant meditator in a lot of ways. It was one of those things that I talked about for years. It's like, oh, meditation is great. I'm a yoga instructor. I have to talk about this. But I wasn't really practicing it. I think because I wasn't really ready to have a true look at myself, or true intimacy with myself. And it's only really been in this past year of embracing a daily routine that I've built a time for meditation into my schedule. But what's so important about meditation is that it provides this opening in your mind to show you that you can observe your thoughts instead of being so identified with them. And there's a story that I tell that I decided after the Peace Corps, when I was going through this hard year, that I was going to sign up and do a meditation retreat. And there are these retreats, they're called Vipassana meditation retreats, where you go away for 10 days and you meditate. You don't bring a book, you don't bring a journal, you're by yourself. You eat your meals with other people, but you're not even supposed to make eye contact. But basically for 10 hours a day, you meditate. And I showed up maybe having meditated for most of my life, 20 minutes, thinking that it was going to be a pretty peaceful experience. And I was so just stressed out and culture shocked that the idea of just being on my own for 10 days without having to make conversation with people, it sounded relaxing to me. And then I realized that meditating for 10 hours a day is really tough work. It's physically hard. My back was hurting, and I was realizing that there was a lot of stuff that I never dealt with that was starting to come up, and I didn't really want to deal with it yet because I had committed to this retreat. I had to. And because I had nothing to read, we have these moments sort of in between meditation or before meals or something. We're just in a room waiting, and they encourage us even, when we're not meditating, just to pay attention to the breath, to be in the moment, to not let our thoughts carry us off. And I was reading the label on my sleeping bag because I had nothing to read. I'd already read it a few times, and I was reading it again, and I was trying to pay attention to the breath. And there was this voice this voice coming from another part of myself came out. And it said, oh, I don't want to pay attention to my breath anymore. It's so boring. And in that moment, I understood. I said, aha, you voice who is so bored with the present moment, you're the one who is causing all of the problems in my life out of your love of drama. And there was just so much drama in my experience at that moment that I had this moment of clarity where I could see it so clearly, that it was these responses of wanting to make problems happen, of wanting to hang on to the aspects of life that weren't working so well, that were causing me so much pain and suffering. It was costing me so much. And it was only in meditating that I really started to get that. So I'm going to just say that just by building in these moments, even if it's just a few minutes a day, to just sit with your thoughts without trying to change them. You can set a timer on your cell phone. 5 minutes, I think, is a great one to do. Find a place that you can sit where you're relatively undisturbed. If you have kids, maybe meditate with the kids, or let the kids climb on you while you're just closing your eyes, and you can pay attention to your breath and just watch the quality of your thoughts. And notice what you're doing, and don't notice with a hammer, being like, God, I'm not perfect. I'm such a bad meditator. So notice the way you'd be noticing a friend, and say, okay, I'm stressed today. There's a lot of thoughts. My vata is completely out of balance. And what can I do in this moment to actually take care of myself? Which is probably the daily routine. It's like, can I go to bed earlier tonight? Can I drink more water? Am I dehydrated? Do I need the extra cup of coffee? Is the brownie at 3 p.m., is it really self-care, or can I skip that today and go for a walk or write in my journal? What is actually self-care in these moments? And I think what meditation does is it just provides a window and an opening that we're not just going through our habitual response, but we're starting to change the pattern and build more consciousness. And I think that's what we really want in our life is a greater sense of license, and consciousness, because once we start to have that, then it becomes fun, because then we get to consciously start to craft the life that we're looking for. Which brings me to my last tip here of breaking through stress into enjoyment of life, and that is to start really small. That the reason often that willpower does not work is, one, that we exhaust it, and two, because we can't make a radical change. It's too hard. And think about it that like you're dealing with your own habitual responses. You're dealing with the habitual responses of your family and probably their family. In Ayurveda they say 7 generations past. And you're chugging along with this momentum of this is how we do things. We deal with our stress by eating. We deal with our stress by drinking. We deal with our, feelings of not being good enough by staying up late and answering emails. And then to say like, okay, well the diet starts tomorrow, or I'm going to bed at 9 o'clock tonight. Like it's just not going to work. Like maybe it'll work for a few days, but the willpower that would take to kind of pull back all of that momentum and change it's almost impossible. Which is why, throw away your diet books. Like it's not going to happen. But what does work, and what I work with and with my clients, especially in these group coaching classes I do for women, is that we embrace a philosophy called Kaizen. And what Kaizen methodology is it's actually a Japanese business philosophy that is about making the smallest change that you can possibly make on a consistent basis. So it's much more about changing your mentality for the long road ahead, and just saying every day I can do a little bit better. And for me, I've given up coffee in these past few months, which is huge for me because I love coffee. And I always said that this was like something I could never give up. I got to a cup a day about a year ago, and I said I'm not giving up my cup a day. But I've worked really steadily over this past year, and a cup a day turned into a cup, a few times a week, which turned into a cup on the weekends at home, which turned into, I'm not buying coffee anymore. I'm not going to make it at home, but if I go out, I'll have coffee, which turned into just coffee out on special occasions. And the reason I kept bringing it down was that every time I would drink it, it made me feel jittery and crappy, and I realized that I felt better before I drank the coffee. But yet, because I had such a habitual response to coffee, I couldn't give it up. And honestly, it still calls me. And right now, I'm on black tea. And I'm transitioning. I just did a detox, and what I find every time I come out of the detox, it's so much easier for me to come out of it and to let go of some of my addictive food patterns. And I'm finding that black tea, when I have it now, I'm much more sensitive to it, and I feel a little sore throat after I drink it. I feel like my energy gets a little jittier, even though it's not as much as coffee. And so I'm starting to move to green tea now. So I think this is a really great Kaizen approach of just being that, take the long road on this stuff. Be kind to yourself. If you're looking to get to bed earlier, don't try to go hours earlier to bed. Like, seriously, try 15 minutes earlier to bed. Meditate for 2 minutes, instead of saying you're going to meditate for 20. Like, start 2 minutes. Do 2 minutes for a month. Then move to 5 minutes, But what it is you're going to start to build a sense of self-esteem that makes you feel like you're a person who has true empowerment over your life. That you're a person who can build a daily routine that feels good, even if it takes you, a while to get to that place. So that if you just go slow and steady, you'll get there eventually. It'll be a pretty good process of it. You'll feel good about yourself, and you'll start to really see the benefits of it. So I hope we're at an hour right now, and I can't believe a whole hour has passed. And I'm just so grateful to everyone for being on the line and listening, and everyone who's listening at home too. I hope that you take this information, you start to practice it, take the long road. Know that it's impersonal, that we learn these patterns, and really look at what perfectionism is costing you in your life. What I can offer at the end of all of this is if you want someone to look at that perfectionist process for you and really help you ask you those questions and take a deeper look at it, then I would love to do that. It's a conversation I have with a lot of women. It's a transformational conversation. And you can do this. I'm going to send you an email tomorrow which has the information from this call, a recording of it if you want to listen to it again or forward it to anyone else. And there will also be an opportunity to sign up for a free 30-minute session. We do them over the phone where we can have this conversation. And it's powerful. It's transformative for me. I learn something in every conversation that I lead, and it's also a really good way to see if it would be a good fit for us to work together in any way. And the way that I love to work with women is in a group coaching format where I take a group of women together to through a habit change process. So we can do it on our own, slow and steady. It's really hard if we don't have the support around us. I'm not going to lie about that. It's something that we need a really good community around us. We need people who have habits that we want to emulate and people who can inspire us and help us when we fall off. And that's this deep Ayurvedic knowledge of really knowing ourselves from the inside. I offer that with this habit change science, and there's so many ways to really tweak the habit change to help you make this stuff work for you in a really attainable way. And then I offer all of that in a really fun, dynamic group format that we do. There's some in-person component to it, but we do it mostly online. And I'm leading a group through a 10-week pilot right now of 10 women, and it's been really powerful for everybody. It's been powerful for me to witness how much these habits can change us and shift us into a place where we've really let go of the stress response and really start to enjoy life and feel life moving through us, because I think is what we really want. I'm starting my next class in December. It's almost full right now. I have a few more spots, and I love the women who are in this course. I'm so excited to get started. It starts in the beginning of December. So if hearing all of this, if it made you light up and you're like, I'm ready, man, and the stress response, this perfectionist stuff, it's not serving me. It's cost way too much, and I'm ready to move into this more dynamic way of life, of enjoyment and energy. Then again, sign up for a conversation with me. I'd love to talk to you. I'll tell you a little bit more. I'll be very honest and tell you if it's a good fit for you or not. And also, just stay in touch. I'll be posting on the forum every day of Facebook for Beautiful Life Self-Care. If you don't like me on Facebook already, just go ahead and like the page so you can start to get information. I'll be doing more calls like this in the future. I send out a weekly newsletter that's really packed with a lot of heart, a lot of stories, a lot of really good Ayurvedic information too. So stay in touch, and again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a really enjoyable rest of your day. So namaste.